Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final session of American English Live Series 13. We're so excited that each of you are here with us today. My name is Kate, and I'll be with you along with my colleague behind the scenes, Heather, who will be the moderator helping answer your questions and responding to your comments during today's session. Let's begin today with these thoughtful audience comments from our most recent webinar, What Was It About? Supporting Text Retelling and Response with Lottie Baker. Catherine in the Philippines wrote, another great session. It's amazing to know that with a simple to prepare story wheel, we can provide a lot of language opportunities for our learners. Thanks so much for that comment. And from Maria Eugenia in Panama, today's webinar was excellent. Where I am a teacher, we don't have internet and we can do this story wheel activity without it. Thank you. Great comment. Thank you for that. And finally, from Roxana in Romania, I will use the story wheel in my teaching demonstration. Thanks for this idea. I really love it. A great webinar as usual. Valuable information. That is awesome, and we are happy to hear that you will share it in your teaching demonstration with other colleagues. That's great. So we love to see our teacher participants actively engaged in professional development, so please continue to share your thoughts about our webinars by offering feedback through the end of session quiz or by emailing your ideas to americanenglishwebinars@fhi360.org. We may feature one of your comments during the next series. Throughout Series 13, we've been celebrating English Teaching Forum's 60th anniversary. Each session in this series has been led by invited English Teaching Forum authors, and it's covered article topics related to reading, storytelling, and learning disabilities. We hope you are able to use the practical ideas we've shared. So here's what to expect today. The session is about 60 minutes long. The presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments as well. But we really hope to hear from you, our audience, so that we can address your ideas and experiences. So please do share your thoughts using the comments feature or the chat box. And when our session comes to a close, you'll have an opportunity to receive a digital badge for your participation. At the end of the session, we will share a link. It will have a multiple choice little quiz for you. Click on that link and complete that quiz. Answer 2 out of 3 questions correctly. And once you've successfully done so, you can expect to receive your badge via email within about a week. And before we begin, we are thrilled to announce the presentation lineup for AE Live Webinar Series 14, which begins on May 11th. As you can see, we'll explore topics related to social emotional learning, multi-level classrooms, and English for Specific Purposes, ESP, teaching about climate change in the EFL classroom. We can't wait to learn with you all then. And now let's begin today's webinar, Accommodating Learning Disabilities in the English Language Classroom. Inevitably, English language instructors will encounter students with learning disabilities in their classrooms. However, researchers have found that ELT educators often lack sufficient training in inclusive teaching practices. Today's webinar aims to provide English language instructors with basic tools for helping English learners with learning disabilities succeed in the classroom. We will first establish definitions for learning disabilities and inclusive classrooms. Next, we'll examine supportive instructional options such as universal design for learning, scaffolding, and peer-assisted learning strategies. And by the end of the webinar, you will have considered a variety of approaches that are beneficial for students with learning disabilities, as well as their non-disabled peers. And now we're pleased to introduce our presenter, Jimily Soul. Jimily is a PhD candidate in Composition and Applied Linguistics at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. She has worked as an English language teacher and teacher trainer over the past 15 years, serving as a U.S. Department of State English Language Fellow in Bangladesh and the Ivory Coast, and as an English language specialist in Vietnam and Central Asia. Her research interests include disability studies, teaching writing, peace education, genre analysis, large class pedagogy, and teacher education. Welcome, Jimily. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Kate. I am really thrilled to be here with all of you as I welcome you to our webinar where we share ideas about an important topic of accommodating learning disabilities in the English language classroom. So a warm welcome to all my fellow educators around the world who are with us today. I just want to let you know that the concepts and the ideas that we go over in the webinar today can be found in the English teaching forum article of the same name. So whatever we discuss here, if you're interested in learning more or reviewing some of it, you can always access this article on American English at state.gov. All right, so here are our learning goals for today. First, we're going to define some key concepts. We're going to talk about what we mean when we say learning disability. And we're also going to discuss this idea of the inclusive classroom. And then we will talk about 3 instructional strategies that we can use for helping our learners in an inclusive classroom. All of these strategies are made to be helpful for both students with learning disabilities or other kinds of disabilities, as well as their non-disabled peers. Throughout the entire webinar, you will have chances to think about how you might apply these ideas in your own classroom. All right, so to start off with, most of us have worked with students that we felt might be struggling in our classes. So what are some of the ideas or some of the techniques that you used with some of your struggling learners? If you could please just type your ideas into the chat box, that would be great.
Yeah, let us know, everybody. What have you done to help struggling learners in your classes? What are some techniques or strategies that you've used when you notice a student might be struggling or might not be grasping the ideas or the language quite as quickly as you were hoping? What have you done to help these types of learners? Let's see, and we have a lot of people saying hello from around the world and people saying hello to you, Jimmy. I think some of your past participants are here today from
Hello,
other
everyone.
workshops you've done.
Yeah, so great to be with you today. I don't see your
Absolutely.
messages personally, but I just want to know that I want you to know that I know that you're there.
Very nice. That's so sweet. That's so nice. So let's see. Mihaela says different types of worksheets, peer-to-peer support. That's a great idea. Let's see. Regeneris says differentiated instruction. Great. What other ideas or things have you done? Doing dictation exercises? Plan again. I love that one. So maybe you plan some more for those. Sandra says have them in the front seat. Grace says have them in the front seat. Give them models and examples. Other people saying differentiated instruction. Inam says teamwork and scaffolding. Brainstorming, putting them in partners from Sidoni. Giving them individual work and adapting materials from Zainab. Absolutely. Thanks everybody for sharing.
There are so many great ideas here, and I won't be able to respond to all of them right now, but I just want to mention that this idea of peer-to-peer is going to be related to one of the activities that we discuss later on in the webinar. And I also really like this idea of plan again. And I like the concept behind it because it means that, you know, sometimes we have to ask ourselves as teachers, what could I do? How could I change this? Maybe I need to think differently, or maybe I need to do things differently. So in other words, there isn't just like some sort of exact template that we can use always to help all of our learners. So really great ideas, everyone. Okay, so then we're going to talk a little bit about how we define this concept of learning disability. And to date, there is still no perfect definition. Scholars don't yet agree on an exact definition, and they don't yet agree on what criteria we can use to define a learning disability. So with that in mind, there is a definition that can sort of help us, and it's this idea of unexpected underachievement. So in other words, a student may not be performing as they would be expected to for their age or their grade level. And this is, even though they've had the same kind of help and instruction as the other students. Learning disabilities can affect many different skills. They might affect a student's ability to read or to write, to speak, to spell, to do mathematics, to reason. They might also affect a learner's ability to maintain their attention. They can affect memory, as well as coordination, social skills, and maturity. So there are many different ways that learning disabilities can impact a learner. However, we can sort of think about these broadly, and we can categorize the different learning disabilities into three main categories. So that would be difficulties with reading, difficulties with writing, and then difficulties with math. And it's important to note that the most commonly occurring learning disabilities relate to challenges with literacy skills. Before we go ahead, I will also add that in this webinar, we are focused on learning disabilities. Of course, physical disabilities are also important, and we also want to be inclusive for students who have physical disabilities as well. But our main focus today is on learning disabilities. So these are disabilities that affect a student's ability to reason or cognition, or to analyze things rather than a physical disability. In a future webinar, we can talk more about different kinds of disabilities.
Sounds good, thanks.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of the inclusive classroom. So the inclusive classroom focuses on making schools an effective learning place for all students, no matter what sorts of challenges they might have or what kinds of backgrounds they might come from. For students with disabilities, and of course our emphasis today is on learning disabilities, inclusive education means that these students have access to the common curriculum in the general education classroom. Now, I just want to note that while the inclusive classroom works very well for a lot of students with different kinds of learning disabilities, it may not be effective for every student. So in other words, some students who might have more severe disabilities, they still might need some extra instruction, and they might even need extra instruction outside of the regular classroom. And they might, and sometimes they might need other kinds of extra support. So here is an interesting statistic that we have. As far as we understand from the research, approximately 10% of all learners have some kind of learning disability. So if you think about a classroom of 30 students, then we can estimate that about 3 of those students would have a learning disability. And this actual number could be higher because in fact, we're not always really able to diagnose these disabilities. These learning disabilities often go undiagnosed. So this leaves us in a place where we know that we have some students with learning disabilities. We might have a sense that they have a learning disability or some intuition about it, but we may not know exactly what that learning disability is. Nonetheless, we can feel comforted knowing that educating students with learning disabilities in inclusive classrooms has shown to be effective for all students. So that's for the students with learning disabilities as well as their non-disabled peers. All right, then when we think about what we can do as English language teachers, it's important to first recognize that you as the English language teacher are not expected to diagnose students with learning disabilities. It very often takes a team of specialists to diagnose a learning disability accurately, and it often takes some period of time for them to be able to make that diagnosis. If you have a disability office at your school or a special education office at your school, you can always, reach out to them for support. But in fact, many places simply don't have enough support in this area. And then we have to see what we can actually do in these situations. So it's important to keep in mind that even though we may not know exactly what challenge a student is facing, or we may not know exactly what learning disability they have, we can still empower these students by using teaching approaches that are good for all of them, whether they have some kind of disability or not. And that is going to be the focus of our instructional approaches today. All right, so as we move into those instructional approaches, I have a quote for you here, and I would like to ask the host, Kate, to read it for us.
Sure, definitely. So let's see. The quote says, "My disability exists not because I use a wheelchair, but because the broader environment isn't accessible." And this was said by Stella Young, a disability rights activist.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kate. And I would like to ask you a question about this quote. How do you think this idea in the quote can apply to English language teaching or instruction?
Yeah, great question. I think in this quote, it seems that Stella Young is describing a physical disability and explaining that the real bigger problem is that the physical environment isn't available to her because things are not put in place, different things that we can think of that would be helpful for people in wheelchairs. And I think how it applies in education is we need to make sure that we're putting educational and maybe even psychological help and support for our students who have disabilities or learning or struggle with learning, to make sure that the learning environment is accessible for those students as well.
Yeah, that's right, Kate. We can think about barriers. We often talk about barriers when we talk about disabilities in education. And if we think about this person who is in a wheelchair and they want to have access to, let's say, a building, but there are only stairs. So then those stairs prevents them from being able to go into that building. They cause a barrier. But if that building is built with stairs and a wheelchair ramp and an elevator, that person doesn't have any, or they won't have the same kinds of problems of entering that building. So we want to sort of take this sort of idea of design into our minds and think about how we can, if there are barriers, we can get rid of those barriers. If we are, as teachers, prevent or creating those barriers ourselves, we can think about how we might remove them so that education is accessible to all of our students. So these are the three approaches that we're going to focus on today to provide students with more opportunities to learn so that we are helping all of our students, whether they have some kind of learning disability or not. We will first focus on universal design for learning, or UDL, and then we will talk about scaffolding, and we will follow that by peer-assisted learning strategy, or PALS. Okay, so first we're going to focus on universal design for learning, or we often refer to it as UDL. So universal design for learning is a framework that addresses the variability of all learners, whether or not they have any kind of disability, in order to meet their needs. So we understand that no learner is exactly the same. None of us have the same way of thinking, and none of us have the same brain. So when we are creating our courses or carrying out our lessons, we can apply the principles of UDL to help us to better meet the needs of all learners. UDL has three principles. The first one is multiple means of engagement, and then we have multiple means of representation, and the third one is multiple means of action and expression. And as we start, I will let you know that sometimes there is some overlap in these different principles. All right, we're going to go
Great.
ahead
And
and get,
I was
yes,
just going to share a couple of nice comments before we dive into each of these principles. We
excellent.
have some great audience participation. So Vania and Key both mentioned how important inclusive classroom methods are, and that they are require a lot of effort, but it's really worth it. So that was nice from Vania and Key. And Miriam wrote, disability in the learning context exists when students don't have access to the curriculum due to the learning situation or environment. I think she was responding to that beautiful quote you shared. So just wanted to share those nice thoughts from our audience.
Yeah, thank you. I will touch on that a little bit as we go into this idea of universal design for learning. This idea of effort, yeah, that's true. It might take more effort to set up an inclusive classroom or to carry one out. Of course, this is also a matter of practice. The more that we get used to doing it, the better we can become at it. Nonetheless, it's a process, and it's something where we always also have to be evaluating ourselves and really thinking about whether we have presented things or we are teaching in a way that is inclusive. And if not, what can we change or what can we adjust? So back to our UDL principles. The first one is multiple means of engagement. And here by engagement, we mean motivation or interest. So our learners, are all of us, are engaged differently by different tasks and learning situations. We know as students ourselves, I might really like a certain kind of learning or a certain kind of task. Let's say I really like to write things. But my partner, my friend Kate, may not like writing so much, and she might prefer to do things like listen to podcasts or watch videos to learn content. So what we can do as teachers, as educators, is to think about different ways that we can engage our students throughout a lesson and over the period of a course. So a couple of ideas or strategies would be to have a variety of interactional patterns in each lesson. So we want to have some pair work, group work, whole class work, and individual work all together in the same lesson. And we also want to think about having a variety of different activities in a lesson and over the entire course. So again, engagement. Let's think about this as how we motivate and interest our students. I would like to address this first question to you, Kate.
Sure.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of your ideas about how we as teachers can provide multiple means of engagement?
Sure, yeah. I think you really touched on it there when you said variety and mentioned variety. I think it's really important to have many different activities. Not only will that keep everyone more engaged, but that way you can hit on different people's interests. So if you have music in games and multimedia, but also written text throughout a lesson or throughout a week of lessons, that can really help keep learners interested and also touch on the ways that participants or students might be more excited about or less excited about as a way to engage them.
Thank you, Kate. And I just want to add one point to this, that, sometimes we're biased towards what we like. So if I'm a teacher who likes writing, maybe I want to emphasize that in my class, or maybe I want to emphasize speaking activities. But we should try to, again, evaluate ourselves and step back and remember that our learners might be very different from us and they might have many different interests. All right, so we're going to move on to the next principle of UDL. And this one is called multiple means of representation. We can think of this as input. So again, no learner is the same, and learners will differ in how they perceive and comprehend information. So there's a greater chance of reaching all of our learners when we can provide the inputs in multiple forms. So here I have an example for you. So we know that we often see these kinds of dialogues in English textbooks or ELT textbooks. And instead of maybe just reading the dialogue, we can think about different ways that we would present this. We might read the dialogue. We might also then have our learners listen to the dialogue as well and follow along. And we might then ask them to find some new vocabulary words and have them write that in their notebooks, and then draw some pictures of the new vocabulary to help reinforce their memory. So with each kind of new content or information that we're providing to our students, each kind of new input, we want to think about how we can show that to our students in multiple forms. All right, so we now want to engage you, the audience, and asking you about your ideas for multiple means of representation. Can you tell us some of your ideas about how you might provide multiple means of representation to your students?
Yeah, how would you provide multiple means of representation or input? So we had a nice comment as people are thinking about this question. Fanul said, a lot of encouragement is needed. I also appreciate just one little thing that they have done and then keep pushing them to do their best. That's a great idea. So Kanwal says brainstorming, role plays, laddering would be good ones. Great. What other ways can you provide multiple means of representation? So you can show in different formats, maybe in photos or in videos or in text. What are some other ways that you could? Games to motivate students from Rosario, incorporating singing into the lesson from Regina Reese. And yeah, all of those are great ideas. Thanks for sharing, everybody.
Yeah, I will just to clear things up a little bit. Often in this sort of principle, we might think about, especially for language learners, supplying the content, even the same content in different ways. So if we show them a video, we might also make sure that that video has captioning that they can follow along. Or if we play a listening text, we also might make sure that they have the audio transcripts that they can also read. And this is, again, this is not just giving them different ways to connect to the information. It's also really helping them see that content again and again in different ways, which helps with their language learning. All right, so the third principle is multiple means of action and expression. So basically, we can kind of relate this to the idea of output. And we understand that students, they demonstrate what they learn in different ways. So we want to think about how we can give them some different variety and options in showing and demonstrating their learning. One thing that, we often do as teachers, most of us have done this, most of us maybe still do this, is that we ask our students questions. We ask questions to the entire class sometimes, and we wait for the students to raise their hands. And then we ask the students who have raised their hands to give the answer. Now, this is not necessarily bad, but we also really need to think about what we're doing, especially if we're doing this a lot, because when we do this, we are favoring the students who are willing to raise their hands and speak out in front of the entire class. And we have to keep in mind that a lot of the other students, maybe the ones that are quieter and are not raising their hands, they still might have really good ideas and really good answers. So how could we make sure that those students also have a chance to show us what they know or what they've learned? Sometimes there might be different strategies. Of course, we want to have them work together and talk together, but we also might have them do some answers in a discussion board. We might have them write some of their answers in a journal and other things, so that, even if they are a little bit more reticent, that they still have the opportunity to show us what they know. I have a couple examples here for you on the slide. If we imagine that we're focusing on environmental issues in our classroom, maybe we've just finished a module, then we want, let's say we want our students to do an end assignment. For this, we might give them a few choices. And I have some examples for you here. maybe we can say to them, all right, you can write a research report, or you can create a podcast, or you can compile a photo essay. Now, of course, you're going to have to give them more information and details about each of those exact assignments. But the idea is that you're giving them choice in how they show you what they know. Another idea is to, let's say over the course of a semester, you might have 5 major assignments, and then you would let students choose 4 of those 5. So again, it's the idea of giving them some choice in what they do to represent their learning. Okay, so we'd like to invite you as the audience to share with us some of your ideas.
Yeah, what do you think, everybody? How would you provide multiple means of action and expression for your students? So Patricia said that she could have students do a simulation. Gonzalo says students can be encouraged to share their preferred way to complete assignments with partners or in groups. Great. Simulation, role play, diorama, interview, vlog, blog, wonderful. Giving different examples about the topic. And have them handle their own learning from Funwell. Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I like this idea of the independence and having students handle their own learning, and also giving them some of these choices and maybe how they put the assignment together as well. Those are great ideas. All right, now we have a short little quiz for you. We have the 3 principles of UDL at the top: the multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And then we have 3 examples for you, A, B, and C. And we would like for you to think about each of these and match each of the examples with the corresponding principle. So I will, as you are thinking about this, and you can type your answers in, but please give us 1 and the answer, 2 and the answer, and 3 and the answer all together, all at once. And so the first example is the instructor has focused content on sustainable development, and the teachers are allowed to choose how they format their final project. They could create a website, or they could create a poster, or they can write a letter to an editor. So that is A. And then in B, the instructor is using polls, breakout rooms, and a popular app in an online lesson. And C, we have the instructor providing content through a listening passage and also giving students the corresponding transcript. So please think about your answers. Do we have a lot of answers coming in, Kate?
We are starting to, as people get their ideas together and read through each of those. Let us know what you think. Number 1, connect it to A, B, or C, 2, and 3. So let's see. Zanep said 1 is, okay, number 1, multiple means of engagement, is B. Number 2, representation, is C. And number 3 is A. I think she might be quite correct. And we see a lot of other people with similar ideas chiming in. So what is the correct answer, Jimmy?
So the answer set that you just gave us is correct. Now, of course, as I said earlier when we started, there can be some overlap in how we see this. So for instance, B, where the instructor is using these different sorts of ways to engage the students, that is multiple means of engagement, but we could also say that is in some ways multiple means of representation. So these, there's these, principles are not always like completely distinct. They sometimes come together to some degree. But great idea, everyone, on answering the questions for the quiz. So just to sum up and recap UDL, UDL is this framework for how we design and carry out our lessons. To me, it's sort of a philosophy. It sort of asks us to think about how we, or to change how we think about teaching, and to think again about how we remove those barriers so that all of our students can be successful in our classes. And this, like, I mentioned before, it's a process. We might do something and then see that we need to make adjustments. I just want to also say that all of these different principles are going to depend on you and your context. You're going to have to decide how to provide the multiple means of engagements, the multiple means of representation, and the multiple means of action and expression. All right, great. So far in the webinar, we have talked about universal design for learning. And next, we're going to go over scaffolding, and then we will talk about peer-assisted language strategies. All right, so here we are at scaffolding, and I know some of you already started to mention this at the beginning of the webinar. So it's really great that you have familiarity with this concept. So we're going to just go over it. We're going to talk about it a little bit more and how we might apply it in our classrooms. So scaffolding is an instructional technique where we give students a step-by-step process in order to complete a task or an assignment. One thing we want to keep in mind with scaffolding is that we are doing these things step by step, but we are eventually hoping to move our students towards independence. It may not happen in one lesson, but the ideal goal is that they will be able to carry out these tasks without the instructor. So scaffolding has been shown to be successful for both English language learners with learning disabilities as well as their non-disabled peers. All right, so I'm going to share with you a couple of examples of scaffolding today. And so if we look at the first one, you can see this young boy at the bottom of the stairs. And we can imagine that the teacher has told us, okay, your assignment is to write a paragraph or just write a paragraph. And, we might have an idea about what she wants us to do, but we may have no idea how to get to the top of that stair to get to that final product without some more instruction. So the problem sometimes when we don't scaffold is that we can leave our students feeling very anxious because they might know what is expected of them to some degree. I mean, they may not be completely sure about that, but they also don't know how to get there. So they're just going to stand, they might just stand there like waiting for some help. So here is an example of some broad steps that we might use with this paragraph assignment. So first of all, the teacher might look at some model paragraphs with the students and they can analyze them. Then the teacher might share some of their evaluation expectations with the students so they know what is expected of them and what the target is. Then the teacher and students might work together to brainstorm some ideas. Then the next step would be that the students would then draft their paragraph. After that, they would get some feedback. Then they would revise their paragraph. And finally, they would submit their final draft. So this can help to take them from the bottom of the stairs to the top of the stairs, step by step. All right, here is another example of scaffolding. So this is also something that I think might happen a lot in the English language classroom. The teacher goes into the classroom, maybe they have an audio player or a computer, and they tell the students, okay, now we are going to listen to a passage. And then they play the listening text. So that, sometimes it's okay, but it often favors the students who are going to already be good at that task. And it can leave behind the other learners that need a little more assistance and help. So in this scenario, we are imagining how we might scaffold a before listening task. So first of all, we might want to activate the schemata of our students, connect the listening that they're going to do to their prior knowledge and personal experience. Then we might go over some language items. We might go over vocabulary that they will hear that is new to them. We might go over some new expressions. We might need to review some relevant grammar items. And then we might need to prep the students to know what they should do when they listen, like what is the purpose of their listening activity. For instance, they might be asked to listen for gist, or they might be asked to listen for details. We also want them to know if we are expecting them to do some kind of specific task while they're listening. We might ask them, for instance, to write down all the characters' names, or maybe write down all the positive things they hear about the new school or something like that. So again, scaffolding is really important in providing that support for all of our students so that they can succeed. And it doesn't, it takes away this sort of situation where only the already good students are going to succeed at what we're asking them to do. All right, we have some time for you to share some of your ideas. So imagine this is a situation that you want to have your students do a 1-minute video clip. How might you scaffold a lesson based on this 1-minute video clip?
Yeah, let us know. How would you scaffold an activity related to a 1-minute video clip? What kinds of support would you put in place for students maybe before or during watching this video clip? What do you think, everybody? What are some things that you can do to scaffold a video clip activity in your classroom? Let's see, we have providing vocabulary. Great. So maybe vocabulary ahead of time. Sandra says you could describe the video to the students. You could make predictions based on the title of the video. Great. You could explain what you will do after the video. And Mahi says you could guide and describe. Mahela says you could provide a dialogue and maybe some grammar and ideas, brainstorming about the topic. Mohammed also says providing a purpose for viewing the video would be a good idea. So that's great. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, lots of great ideas. All right, we have the environmental concern again, because of course, this is always something that we need to be aware of and help our students be aware of. So let's imagine that you have a project and this project has been based on environmental concerns. What might you ask your students to do? I mean, how could you scaffold them into this project?
Yeah, what do you think, everybody? How would you scaffold based on a project based on an environmental concern? What are some things that you would do to support your students? Let's see. I think Mohammed's idea of providing a purpose was great. I think that applies to a lot of our learning, providing a purpose so students know why they're doing something. That's great. You could provide transcripts and videos about this topic. Great idea. You could provide step-by-step instructions for the project. You could motivate and provide vocabulary from Primitiva. You could share rubrics and project guidelines. And Regenerate says showing pictures about the topic. Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
These are all wonderful ideas, and I do agree with this idea of purpose, that it also it helps to motivate students as well if they understand the purpose behind what you're asking them to do. Okay, so far in the webinar, we have talked about universal design for learning. We have just discussed scaffolding as a strategy to support our students. So the final parts we will discuss peer assisted learning strategies. Okay, so peer assisted learning strategies, or PALS, is a peer-to-peer reading support. And if you look at the picture, I really like this idea of how the peers are supporting and helping the very brave climber trying to get to the top of the rock. And this is kind of the idea, that students are helping each other and they're assisting each other in learning. So PALS, or peer-assisted learning strategies, is a reading program in which a higher performing student is paired with a lower performing student, and they carry out reading activities together. The research on PALS has shown that students who have engaged in PALS have improved their reading ability and performance. And this has been effective for all students from lower levels to higher levels. And it has been effective for students with learning disabilities. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we might have some guidelines if we want to carry out PALS activities. So as I mentioned before, when we carry out PALS, we pair students and we put a higher performing student with a lower performing student. However, my suggestion is that we always do this in a way that is not known to the students. So we don't want any of the students to feel that they are being, embarrassed or shamed in any way in these activities. So you, of course, as a teacher, you have your plan and your ideas, but you don't give away all the secrets. You might just go in and say, okay, today we're going to start with Nancy as the coach and Tony as the reader, and just let students know who they are paired with. It's also a really good idea if you can change partners periodically throughout the course or the semester, because no two students are the same. Even a high performing student, they're not all going to be the same. They're going to have different abilities in reading and different kinds of knowledge. The same with the lower level students. So it's really it's really helpful to all the students if they can work with different peers throughout their PALS activities. For PALS, you want to choose reading material that will fit your students' current reading ability. And you can also choose material to suit your particular reading purpose. You might be focusing on reading for general fluency. You might be focusing on reading comprehension. You might be focused on developing certain language skills, such as vocabulary, pronunciation, or grammar. And one of the great things about PALS is that you can use any reading material. You can just take the readings that you have already in your textbook. You don't need to find anything special or anything outside of what you already have or what you already do. So in the PALS idea, again, we have the higher performing students paired with the lower performing students. And in some roles, a student is considered the coach, and the coach's role is to support and encourage the reader. So each student will take part being a coach at different times, but we might need to help our students understand that when they are in the role of the coach, how they might be able to give good feedback. So again, we want to make sure our students understand that if they're the coach, the idea is that they are supportive and encouraging and helpful. So you might need to share some language with your students before you start. I have a list of some different ideas here. Of course, you can come up with what is going to work best for you and your students, but you might have some sentences like, I think you mispronounced this word, and then let's check the pronunciation together. Maybe, can you read that again? Or great job on the first paragraph, but I think you have a few mistakes in the second paragraph. Let's look at it together. All right, so in PALS activities, the main idea is that we are doing partner reading, but we have a couple of variations we can use. One variation is called paragraph shrinking, which is a summarizing activity, and another is called prediction relay, which is based on text prediction. So for partner reading, we have a reader and we have a coach. So the reader will read aloud and the coach will listen and provide feedback in some way. You might want to have the coach read first. So if the coach reads first, and this is the higher performing, sorry, you might have the higher performing student read first. So this would give the lower performing student a chance to listen and follow along. And in some cases, you might have them read the same text. So the coach might read, for example, a paragraph, and the reader will listen, and then you will switch roles. All right, so paragraph shrinking, this is based on summarizing. So for the paragraph shrinking activity, the reader will read the text, then they will give the main idea in one or two sentences, and they will also touch upon some of the most important details that they have just read. The coach's role will be to listen and to provide feedback on the reader's summary. All right, the third activity, we have prediction relay. And again, this is an activity based on text prediction. So in this scenario, before reading, the reader will look at the text and make predictions about what they think is going to happen. These predictions might be based on clues such as the title and subtitles and visuals. After they read, they will give a short summary of what they have just read, and the coach will decide whether the predictions were accurate. And the coach might also prompt them to, give some other responses as well. So we have some text so we can show you an example of the prediction relay. For this practice, the first time I am going to be the reader and Kate will be my coach. All right, Coach,
All
are you
right,
ready?
so yeah, I am. I'm ready. All right, so we see here, my friend, that the author is O. Henry, and the title is 20 Years. What do you think this might be about if the title is 20 years?
Right. So I'm not completely sure, but if I make a guess, I think that 20 years is somehow important in this story. Maybe there's an event or something that hasn't happened for 20 years, or maybe every 20 years the same event happens again. I'm not really sure, but
Well,
I'm
those are
ready
great
to.
ideas. Yeah, those are great ideas. Well, do you want to go ahead and read this text?
Yeah, let's go ahead and see if we can get some more ideas about what's going to happen here. Okay, the cop moved along the street looking strong and important. This was the way he always moved. He was not thinking of how he looked. There were few people on the street to see him. It was only about 10 at night, but it was cold, and there was a wind with a little rain in it. He stopped at doors as he walked along, trying each door to be sure that it was closed for the night. Now and then he turned and looked up and down the street.
Wow, very great reading. Excellent job. Let's just chat about the text. Let's see. Who was the main person here in these couple paragraphs?
So we have this character of a cop or a policeman.
And what is he kind of doing?
So it seems like he's walking down the street to check to see if the doors on all the businesses are closed and secure for the night.
Yeah, I think so. Do you have any thoughts about what you think might happen next in this text?
So I'm still not really sure about the 20 years at this point, but I can say that there's something kind of scary. There's something a little mysterious, and
hmm
I don't really like the idea of this cop being out by himself, and it's going to be a cold and rainy night. So maybe we should go ahead and read the second part to see if we can get some more understanding of what's happening.
Sounds good.
All right, so it's of course it's the same story, but the next passage. So, what do you think, Kate, might be happening, or what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I agree with you. It seems like something maybe scary or unusual might happen because the author's making us feel this cold and wet, rainy night, and the officer's by himself, that kind of thing. So I just think, I'm not sure what it is, but I think something unusual is going to happen, something surprising.
Okay.
So should
All
I
right.
should I go
Yeah, go
ahead?
ahead and read.
All right. So then the cop suddenly slowed his walk. Near the door of a darkened shop, a man was standing. As the cop walked toward him, the man spoke quickly. "It's all right, officer," he said. "I'm waiting for a friend. 20 years ago, we agreed to meet here tonight. It sounds strange to you, doesn't it? I'll explain if you want, to be sure that everything's all right. About 20 years ago, there was a restaurant where this shop stands, Big Joe Brady's Restaurant." "It was here until 5 years ago," said the cop. Interesting.
So now,
Something unusual did happen, I guess.
yeah, so now what characters do we have in the story at this point?
Now we have the cop and an additional person, so some man who the cop saw at night, and who seems to be kind of nervous, speaking quickly, and very eager to explain himself, but not someone, it doesn't seem like he's someone the cop has seen before, because it seems like it was a bit of a surprise or something like that. And also, he was near a darkened shop, the door of a darkened shop. So that's always a little alarming too.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's still very mysterious, and I'm at this point, I'm still really not sure about what might happen. Um, can you talk about this idea of 20 years?
Yeah, so it seems like he's supposedly meeting a friend who he promised he would meet 20 years ago. And this person must have a very good memory to remember exactly that day. And it must be an important promise if he's here today trying to fulfill that promise.
You're right. It has to be something big. I don't think I could remember an appointment from 20 years ago. All right, so Kate, I don't think we have time to read more of the text right now, but what do you think if we both read the rest of this story and then we can meet again later to talk about it?
Sounds great.
Okay, so um, as teachers, what do you think that you might need to think about when preparing to use the PALS method in a reading focus lesson?
Yeah, great question. What do you think, everybody? We kind of gave you a demonstration of what it might be like. Um, what might you need to consider when preparing to use this method? Let's see. And I like a lot of people are sharing their ideas about what this story might be about. So maybe the cop and the man were classmates, or the man was classmates with someone. What are some things? So let's see. Need to consider the level of the students and the level of the text. Absolutely, that's a great response from Virginia Niece. You need to think about the time, how much time you have to go through. As you mentioned, Jimmy, you need to think about showing the coach what to do, giving examples and models, and you need to consider, um, you know, how the student can encourage the other, as you mentioned before, to make sure that their students are very encouraging to each other. So that's great. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, it is. The timing is also important. And, you can think about how much or how little you want to use this kind of activity. So you might only do it, once a week, or you might want to do it every day. It really just depends on your situation and your students. Okay, now speaking of time, I see that our time is coming to an end, unfortunately. It's been really great to spend this time with all of you, but we have talked about universal design for learning, scaffolding, and peer-assisted learning strategies as different ways that we can meet the needs of all learners in our classes. So just to recap, we want to, as teachers, remember that 10% of all learners have a learning disability. So inclusion is one of the best ways that we can help them in our classrooms. The inclusion has shown many good outcomes in the research for both students that have some kind of disability as well as their non-disabled peers. We talked about universal design for learning as an overall framework for how we plan and organize and deliver our lessons. We talked about scaffolding as a way to provide step-by-step guidance and move students towards independence. And last, we just talked about peer-assisted learning strategies as partner reading that can help students support their peers in reading activities. So now here's the final question that I have for you. What ideas from this webinar do you plan to implement in your classes this term?
Yeah, let us know. What ideas from this webinar do you plan to implement in your classes? Let us know. And we have so many other similar comments. Kelson says, great tips. I love the aspect of role play. It promotes social skills, flexibility in learning, and boosts learners' self-esteem. Absolutely. Inclusive education is an integral part of children's rights, from Carlos. Wonderful. And Mari says, remember, it's not a lack of will to complete tasks. We need to give learners options. So that's a great response, giving options. And scaffolding, the people are saying they want to incorporate scaffolding. PALS, Jimena, taking into account time and level. Zamu says all of them. All of them, of course, from Pedro. And PALS and scaffolding from many others. So thanks so much, everybody, for those ideas.
So here are the references that we used in the webinar, and most of these are also the same references from the article in English Teaching Forum. If you're interested in reading more about learning disabilities or what we talked about, you can reference any of these texts.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy, for sharing these great strategies that benefit all learners and help teachers create more inclusive classrooms. I know our audience is very thankful as well. I see many thank you comments in the comments